Good evening. From Copenhagen, Denmark, tonight we bring you the story of an extraordinary European debate, one that cuts to the very core of the continent's values, its unity and its credibility as a global power. At stake is whether the European Union should seize frozen Russian assets and use them to finance Ukraine's survival and reconstruction, even as the Middle East crisis casts a heavy shadow over Europe's diplomacy. For months, tens of billions of euros in Russian state reserves and oligarch wealth have been locked inside European accounts. These funds were frozen in the aftermath of Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, a move hailed at the time as both punishment and deterrent. Yet freezing is one thing, seizing is another. And in Copenhagen this week, European foreign ministers gathered to ask the hard question, should that money now be diverted to Ukraine? The EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, was clear. She said ministers acknowledged the need to address Ukraine's financing gap, to hold Russia accountable for war damages, and to explore all avenues for using these frozen assets. Kallas reminded her colleagues that when the funds were first blocked, financial markets did not panic. Markets, she stressed, remain calm. That calm, she argued, is evidence that Europe can manage the risks and must not let legal hesitation become political paralysis. But Kallas did not stop there. She delivered a sharper message directed at Moscow itself. In her words, it is unthinkable that Russia will ever see this money again, unless, and only unless, it fully compensates Ukraine for the devastation it has caused. That blunt declaration was both moral and strategic, a reminder that Europe's goal is not only to finance Ukraine today, but to make Russia pay for tomorrow's rebuilding. Yet the Copenhagen meeting was not limited to Ukraine. Events in Gaza intruded with alarming force. Kallas warned that Israel's announcement of Gaza City as a combat zone threatens to worsen an already catastrophic humanitarian situation. If a military solution were possible, she said, the war would already be over. Gaza, in her words, needs less war, not more war. And the West Bank, Kallas was unequivocal. Israel's decision to expand settlements there is illegal, undermining the very possibility of a two-state solution. Her candid tone extended to Europe's own divisions. She admitted there was no sugarcoating reality. While many ministers offered ideas to improve the situation in Gaza, there was no agreement on how to pressure Israel into changing course. The European Union, once again, was caught between moral outrage and political hesitation. At her side stood Lars Rasmussen, the Danish foreign minister, who added his own sharp interventions. On Russia, Rasmussen warned that Vladimir Putin is trying to buy time and distract the world from his brutal assault on Ukraine. The only language Putin understands, Rasmussen declared, is that of hard pressure. Delay, in his view, is dangerous. Turning to Gaza, Rasmussen's words were equally striking. He said, daily violence continues, and just last week, the United Nations formally declared famine inside the besieged territory. Israel's actions, Rasmussen said, go far beyond acts of self-defense. He repeated Denmark's appeal, Israel must stop the war and change course. And finally, Rasmussen sought to remind the room and the world of what Europe's real strength is supposed to be. The EU, he argued, survives on common ground, on the ability to speak with one voice. In a world of division, unity is the Union's only weapon. But, he cautioned, words alone are not enough. Common ground must become common action. Behind these podium statements lies a more complex reality. Belgium remains reluctant, citing potential legal challenges if Europe appropriates frozen Russian assets. Southern European states worry about economic fallout and financial precedent. Eastern nations closer to the front line demand bolder measures. And across the continent, public opinion remains divided. Support for Ukraine strong, but weariness from inflation, energy crises, and the sheer length of war ever present. Meanwhile, on the Middle East file, Europe faces accusations of double standards. Critics ask, how can the EU demand accountability from Russia in Ukraine while hesitating to confront Israel over Gaza? For Brussels, the dilemma is acute. Too much pressure risks rupturing relations with Israel and the United States. Too little, and Europe appears powerless or worse, complicit. What emerges from Copenhagen is therefore a portrait of Europe at a crossroads. On one side, the promise of decisive action, unlocking frozen billions for Ukraine, signalling to Moscow that aggression carries a price. On the other, the paralysis of division, legal fears, economic worries, and political caution. On Gaza, similar tensions, strong words but an uncertain path to action. For Kaja Kallas, the stakes are existential. She insists that Russia must never again touch its frozen wealth unless it pays Ukraine in full. She insists that Israel must halt its expansion and recognise the human toll of war. And she insists that Europe must act with urgency because every day of delay deepens both Ukraine's wounds and Gaza's crisis. For Rasmussen and his Danish hosts, the message is equally urgent. Unity is strength, but unity must be proven. The credibility of the European Union as a global power capable of defending international law, humanitarian principles and its own security depends on choices made not years from now, but in the coming weeks. Tonight, as Europe debates frozen billions, war rages on in Ukraine. As ministers argue about sanctions and settlements, famine deepens in Gaza. And as diplomats issue statements of unity, the test remains whether those statements can be turned into policy. From Copenhagen, one conclusion stands out. Europe is running out of time. The frozen funds, the war in Ukraine, the crisis in Gaza, all demand action, not only words. Whether the Union can deliver that action will define its role in the world for years to come.
Perfect. Let's start. Welcome to the press conference following the
room without windows. But we had a very long discussion. What took the time?
After today's meeting, do you expect a more unified EU putting pressure on Israel?
Ministers acknowledged the need to address Ukraine's financing gap and to hold Russia accountable for war damages. To achieve this, it is crucial to explore all available avenues while minimizing the potential risks. And I want to stress that financial markets did not react when we froze the assets. Financial markets are calm now as we discuss this, and there are risks, but I'm confident that we are able to mitigate those risks. One thing is absolutely clear where everybody agreed, and this is that given the devastation that Russia is causing in Ukraine and has caused in Ukraine so far, it is unthinkable that Russia will ever see this money again unless it fully compensates Ukraine the damages caused. Israel's announcement that Gaza City is now a combat zone threatens to worsen the humanitarian situation. If military solution was possible, the war would already be over. Gaza needs less war, not more war, and on the West Bank, Israel's decision to advance its West Bank settlements is illegal and undermines the two-state solution. So on the European Union side, there is no sugarcoating to the reality where we are. It was clear that today a broad majority of member states gave more ideas. What more can we do to really improve the situation? We will explore those ideas further. But it's clear that member states disagree on how to get Israeli government to change course.
That Putin is trying to buy time and divert attention from the massive and brutal attacks on Ukraine. He must not succeed. And the only language he understands is that of hard pressure. Daily horrific violence continues, and just last week the UN declared famine in Gaza. Israel's actions go far beyond act of self-defense, and we have repeatedly urged Israel to stop the war and change her course. The strength of the EU is the fact that we are able to find common ground. And now, maybe more than ever, it is crucial to stand united and speak with one voice in a world of division, and perhaps even more important, to change these words into action. Thank you.